The fog is lifting. Clarity is calling you forward. Welcome to Forward in Freedom. I'm Tanya Johnson. This is where awareness becomes power. Let's move forward in freedom.
A woman once told me something that stayed with me. She had finally set a boundary with her sister. Nothing dramatic. She simply said she couldn't be available for late night emotional crisis calls unless it was truly urgent. For years, she had been the person that everyone called. You know, the fixer, the listener, the stabilizer, the one who stepped in when things fell apart. But after that conversation, her sister paused and said something that hit her hard. "You've changed." And later she asked me a question that so many people ask when they began protecting their peace. Did setting that boundary ruin our relationship? And if you've ever asked yourself that question, today's conversation is for you. Because moments like that create one of the most confusing crossroads in personal growth. You finally gather the courage to say something honest. You set a boundary that protects your time, your energy, or your well being. And instead of relief, the relationship suddenly feels different, more tense, more distance, more fragile. And that's when the questions begin. Did I handle that wrong? Did I push too hard? Did setting this boundary ruin the relationship? This is the moment where many people begin doubting themselves. But what's actually happening here is something deeper. And today we're going to unpack it. When a boundary enters a relationship, it doesn't change behavior, it changes the pattern the relationship has been operating under. And when patterns change, dynamics shift. Every relationship develops roles over time. Someone becomes the peacekeeper, someone becomes the problem solver, someone becomes the emotional caregiver, someone becomes the stabilizer when tension appears. These roles aren't always assigned intentionally, they evolve slowly. But over time, they become expectations. So when a boundary appears, even a healthy one, the relationship has to reorganize itself. For example, if someone has always been able to reach you immediately, your availability becomes part of the structure. If someone has always relied on you to smooth over tension, your emotional labor becomes part of the structure. When you change that pattern, the relationship has to find a new equilibrium. And during that adjustment period, it can feel like something is breaking. But often, what you're really seeing isn't damage. You're seeing the relationship respond to a whole new level of clarity. When patterns change, relationships have to reorganize. Many people assume that tension after a boundary means that the boundary was a mistake, but sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes the tension reveals how the relationship had been functioning all along. Some relationships are built around mutual respect, and others quietly depend on imbalance, instant availability, emotional caretaking, conflict avoidance, self sacrifice. When those elements shift, the relationship has to adjust. And sometimes it does, but sometimes the change reveals that the connection had been relying on something unstable. That realization can be uncomfortable, but it also can be incredibly clarifying. A boundary doesn't destroy a relationship, it changes the terms of it. And the moment guilt shows up, this is where many people begin second guessing themselves. They replay the conversation, they analyze their tone. They wonder if they should have softened the limit they just set, not because the boundary was wrong, but because the reaction was uncomfortable. You see, human beings are wired to preserve connection. So when tension appears, our instinct is often to smooth things over, to clarify again, to explain again, to reassure again. But there's a powerful question to ask yourself in that moment. Am I trying to repair harm, or am I trying to relieve someone else's discomfort with my boundary? Those are very different things. You see, repairing harm restores connection. Relieving discomfort often means abandoning your clarity. And learning to recognize that difference is a major step toward emotional freedom. Relieving someone else's discomfort should not require abandoning your clarity. And before we continue, let me pause for a moment and speak to those of you listening who may recognize yourself in this conversation. If you're navigating complicated relationship dynamics right now, whether in your family, workplace, or a close relationship, you don't have to navigate it by yourself. Through Clear Direction Coaching, I work one on one with people who are learning how to move from confusion into clarity. It's helpful when one honest conversation can bring clarity to your situation in a completely different light. If you feel like that kind of guidance would help you, you can learn more or schedule a session at www.cleardirectioncoaching.com. And if you want to explore this journey more deeply, my book, A Women's Exodus Only by Grace, shares the personal path that led me into this work and the clarity that came through it all. Now let's continue. One of the most revealing moments in any relationship happens after a boundary is introduced. A healthy response might sound like this: I didn't realize that was affecting you. Thank you for telling me. But a strained dynamic might respond like this: You're being selfish. Same boundary, two very different reactions. And those reactions reveal something important. They show how that relationship experienced your role before the boundary existed. Some people valued the real connection, and others valued the access that they had to your time, your energy, or your emotional labor. How someone reacts to your boundary often reveals how they benefited from your silence. For people of faith, boundaries can sometimes feel complicated. We value patience, kindness, sacrifice, but I want you to know even Jesus practiced boundaries. He stepped away from the crowds, he withdrew from pressure, and he refused demands that did not align with his purpose. Love does not require unlimited access, and wisdom includes limits. And sometimes obedience to clarity will change how others respond to you. So at this point in the conversation, the real question becomes, what do you do when a boundary changes the dynamic of a relationship? Here's your freedom nugget for the week. Not every relationship shifts after a boundary was meant to stay exactly the same. Sometimes the shift is not destruction, it's alignment. And here's a practical application. If a relationship feels different after you introduce a boundary, resist the urge to rush in and stabilize the discomfort. Give the relationship time to adjust. Observe how the other person responds over time. Do they move toward understanding, or do they continue pushing against the boundary? This response will often reveal more about the health of the relationship than the original conflict ever could. Not every relationship that shifts after a boundary was meant to remain unchanged. You know, studies in interpersonal psychology show that people who consistently maintain clear boundaries report higher emotional well being and healthier long term relationships. Why? Because clarity reduces resentment. When expectations are spoken instead of silently assumed, relationships have a better chance of growing in an honest direction. Take a moment and reflect on this question. Where in your life has a boundary changed the dynamic of a relationship? Now ask yourself something deeper. Did the distance mean the relationship was broken, or did it reveal the role you had been playing? For example, if someone reaches out once you stop solving their problems, the issue may not have been the relationship. The issue may have been the role. Recognizing that difference changes how you respond. So instead of rushing to repair something immediately, you can step back and observe it with clarity. And sometimes that awareness brings tremendous peace. If this episode helped you think about boundaries in a new way, I encourage you to share it with someone who may be navigating the same situation. Many people feel alone when relationships shift after personal growth. Your share could help someone realize that they're not the only one walking through this. And if you're looking for deeper support in your own journey, you can learn more about my coaching work at www.cleardirectioncoaching.com. You can also explore my book, A Woman's Exodus, Only by Grace, where I share the personal journey that led me from confusion into clarity. And if these conversations are helping you, be sure to follow the podcast so each new episode meets you right when it's released. Looking ahead, next time, we're going to talk about something many people struggle with after leaving a confusing or emotionally difficult relationship. How do you rebuild trust in yourself? How do you stop second guessing your instincts? And how do you learn to trust your discernment again? That's where we're headed next. I'm Tanya J, and this is the work of walking forward in freedom. Until we meet again, move forward in freedom.